I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I'm excited to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Arthur Brooks and Jeffrey Goldberg. Thanks for taking some time and space for this conversation during a pretty unsettling time around the globe. FAN's a nonprofit organization that presents a high-quality speaker series offered free to the public on a wide variety of topics, including human development, mental health, education, and social justice. We have over 175 videos of past events archived on our website and YouTube channel, so please be sure to explore. For introductions, Arthur Brooks is the William Henry Bloomberg Professor of the Practice of Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School and Professor of Management Practice at Harvard Business School. Before joining Harvard faculty in July of 2019, he served for 10 years as president of the Washington, D.C.-based American Enterprise Institute, one of the world's leading think tanks. Professor Brooks is the author of many books, including the national bestsellers, Love Your Enemies, How Decent People Can Save America from the Culture of Contempt, and The Conservative Heart, How to Build a Fairer, Happier, and More Prosperous America. He is also a columnist for The Atlantic, host of the Atlantic podcast, How to Build a Happy Life, and the subject of the 2019 documentary film, The Pursuit, which Variety named as one of the best documentaries on Netflix in August 2019. Jeffrey Goldberg is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. He joined The Atlantic in 2007 as a national correspondent and was named the 164-year-old magazine's 14th editor-in-chief in October of 2016. During his editorship, The Atlantic has set new audience and subscription records, and its journalistic reach has become global. Digiday recently stated that The Atlantic is, quote, enjoying its most relevant cultural moment since the 19th century. Before joining The Atlantic, Mr. Goldberg served as a Middle East correspondent and the Washington correspondent for The New Yorker, and was also a writer for the New York Times Magazine. And now let's welcome Arthur Brooks and Jeff Goldberg.
Thank you. Thank you, Lonnie. I appreciate it. Arthur, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Jeff.
Wearing a tie, which is now, I guess, mandatory for all #1 New York Times bestsellers. Right.
You know, it was. I'm informed by the New York Times that to maintain my perch, I have to wear this.
Yeah. You gotta step up your look.
Question of respect. It really is.
Yeah. So before we begin talking about happiness, let's talk about whether temporal success brings happiness. You just reached that very illustrious perch, #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Did it make you happy?
Well, you know, what is happiness after all?
Let's just answer the question. Did it make you happy?
It gave me a few shots of dopamine. But look, this is what I teach at Harvard University. And I said to myself, metacognitively, I might add, that this dopamine, this too shall not last. 1 week from now, when I'm not #1 New York Times bestseller list, I'm back to being what I was before.
Number two? Well, you're the #2 bestseller. Well, seriously, don't squirm away with humor from this question. It's an important question before we jump into the. I mean, did you feel a kind of satisfaction? Did you feel victory? Did you feel somewhat empty? I mean, you yourself, and we've talked about this in the past. Obviously, we understand that the dopamine hamster wheel, or however you call it. Going from material success to material sense to fame to this kind of fame, it's all necessarily fleeting. Right. But is it better to? It's like I guess the analog is it better to be rich or poor? Well, rich is not going to make you happy, but all things being equal, you might as well have more money than less. Should a person seek career success like you're having right now in order to feel fulfilled in life?
People are built to be strivers. I mean, this is one of the things that we found for the longest time, that people want the admiration of others. William James, really the father of social psychology, at Harvard, wrote in 1890 that the humans they seek out the admiration of their kind. This is just a natural part. It's an evolved thing. Our evolutionary biologists have always said that we're trying to be special. We're trying to be unique. Now, for the longest time, these kinds of distinctions that we would make among ourselves that were relatively minor. I mean, it would be, I have a little bit more land and a higher yield of corn than the person. But now we have this incredible the ingenuity that we put toward actually being able to get the attention of strangers has led to a lot of pretty interesting psychological conditions. And one of the things that we find, and that I study, as a matter of fact, and I was lecturing on this yesterday to my students, is that of the 4 real worldly rewards, which are money, power, pleasure, and fame, and sort of everything goes into it, fame is literally, according to psychologists, the only one of those rewards that you can ever be happy only in spite of. You seek it, you want it, you crave it, but when actually people get this distinction beyond a tiny little bit of temporal satisfaction, if you dwell on it at all, it will make you less happy. Now, that is a very important thing to realize. It actually helps you understand the misery that so many famous people have. And you know, in our business, we'll never get that kind of fame to begin with. But understanding,
speak for yourself, buddy. Speak for yourself. Can I ask you this about that? Is fame so ambivalent because it's actually not fun to be famous, to be noticed and recognized and bothered and all that? Or is it just the defense of fame, the recognition of the extreme fleetingness of it? You know, I had a hit record 20 years ago. I was in a movie. Is it that?
Yeah, it's exhausting. I mean, it's this is Emily Dickinson talked about, oh, how dreary to be a frog croaking away all day long in the bog. And ultimately to maintain the attention of other people is really dreary business. I mean, the idea, it's like a very famous rock and roll musician one time told me that maintaining fame is 99% boredom and 1% terror.
Right.
That, you know, it's just not fun to do something. It's not inherently rewarding either. I mean, the reward for becoming well known is that people bother you in airports. Right. You know, this is not as good as, you know, having enough money to buy a yacht, put it that way.
Where they won't bother you. That's the pursuit of a yacht is actually antithetical to the pursuit of fame in a kind of way. The yacht protects you from other people.
That's exactly right. So what you have to work really hard for this. And there's an old sort of existentialist riddle. You know, what's the first place in a pie eating contest? I wrote this in my column for you last week. The answer is pie. So I hope you like pie. When you're actually looking for notoriety, you have to do all kinds of hard things, and the result is you get to do them for the rest of your life. So no wonder.
Staying on this theme, and it's interesting because you were a professional musician for many years, albeit not a rock star, but in classical music as a French horn player. But it is one of the sadder groups of people I've observed and sometimes met are people who have to make their living in their 50s, 60s, even 70s, and occasionally 80s, playing songs live in front of audiences that they wrote 40 or 50 or 60 years ago.
Yeah. And
heard 1 million times. And all they have as a means of making money is the nostalgia tour. And it's an interesting story for you, actually, because imagine you have to, that your past, the one thing that you did in the past, the #1 hit you wrote, is the only thing that you have to actually pay your bills today. Seems like a very fraught situation.
For sure. And this is one of the reasons that you find that people in that situation typically are not happy. They're not happy people. And look, it's the world's smallest violin playing for people like this. The most extraordinary thing, and this is actually one of the key reasons I wrote my book, is that having exposure to a lot of leaders, a lot of CEOs, a lot of people who have attained a lot of worldly success, they tend to be the ones who are most frustrated and disappointed as they get older. This is the striver's curse, is that you do something that for which you're so successful, you worked so hard for it, but what goes up must come down. It's if you don't do anything with your life, you don't know when it's over effectively. But if you do a lot with it, and then you actually are suffering some decline, which is inevitable, that decline, not mental decline, we're not talking about cognitive decline, but you simply can't maintain these level of skills forever when you're doing something that's really extraordinary, and that leads to a lot of hardship. And so what motivated this book was actually to think about how the human tend toward excellence doesn't actually lead toward frustration inevitably. In other words, there doesn't have to be this big penalty for people for trying to live their best life. And that's the nut I was trying to crack.
Right. Before we wrap up this session of the inner sadness of rock stars, I want to just quote another very famous rock star, Bruce Springsteen, who once said that the constant deluge of admirers and people who want to touch him and hear from him and be near him, that he said that is the price of having all of his dreams fulfilled. In other words, that the having to be nice to everyone around you, because if you're not nice, then it goes viral, it goes on social media, then you turn out to be a jerk rock star. But the having to perform constantly your virtue in public because everybody knows who you are, that's the price you pay for having all your dreams fulfilled. And it's an interesting observation. But we'll move on from that. Let's talk about the book. And seriously, congratulations on it. Obviously, there's a deep desire on the part of Americans, especially 2 years into the pandemic, I think, to understand how to make them happy. But you've said something and written this, obviously, that I find really interesting, that one sure way not to achieve happiness is to seek happiness, qua happiness. Can you talk about that a little bit? That the pursuit of happiness for happiness's sake is chimerical.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that Nathaniel Hawthorne talked about. And, Nathaniel Hawthorne was not a psychologist, obviously, but he was pretty sharp about this. And he said that happiness is like a butterfly. If you try to catch it, you probably won't. But if you sit quietly, it might come and sit on your shoulder. That's actually not quite right either. However, one of the things that we find is that people who wish they were happier, they get less happy because they're effectively and paradoxically, they're focusing on their unhappiness. If you say, I wish I were happier, you're actually focusing on not the opposite, because happiness and unhappiness are not opposites. They're actually different cognitive processes, but you're focusing on the thing that's actually bringing you discomfort. The key to finding happiness, number one, is not wishing you had it, but doing the work to understand it. Number one. Number two, applying the best practices to your life. And number three, sharing it with other people. It's really a three-step process. And this is something we've learned over the past 25 years or 30 years, when the work and the serious social science and neuroscience of happiness has absolutely exploded. And so and once again, there's just an enormous amount to learn about how you might be looking at you might be looking at the Bible, you might be looking at the works of Aristotle, or the Vedic wisdom, or you might be looking at modern social science. There's or listening to your grandmother. This is also data and valuable. But the whole point is, do the work. If when people say to me, I wish I were happier, you wouldn't say, I wish I knew more mathematics. Get a book is basically what it comes down to. And then do the work. And the work requires that you actually apply yourself and get some best practices and take some of the ideas and practice them in your life in much the same way that you would after you read a book on golf, you'd go golfing. But most importantly, and this is the most beautiful thing about studying the social science of happiness, is that actually it doesn't work until you make it, as we talked about it a minute ago, metacognitive. You got to move it from feelings into your executive brain. And the best single way to do that is teaching it. I have this class that I teach at the Harvard Business School. I'm in the middle of the semester. I'm finishing up the semester right now. It's a really oversubscribed class because people want greater happiness. And for their final project, I have 4 kids who didn't get into the class for everyone who did. And for your final project, you have to set up a version of the class outside the class, download my PowerPoint slides, put your name on, and teach the class to kids who didn't get into the class, and then videotape the class and turn it in. That's your final project, because that's how you cement the ideas in, is sharing happiness, sharing love with others.
It's also how Christianity grew into a worldwide religion, but we'll put that aside for a minute.
It's a very entrepreneurial religion in this way, indeed.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. By the way, my method during my whole misbegotten academic career was to just wish I knew more math, by the way. I mean, it doesn't, it's a
well-worn, how you wind up being an editor.
it's a well-worn path for a lot of people, but you should understand. Talk about, I mean, let's I want to cut to the chase in one sense, and talk about what you have learned to be the building blocks of happiness. And I want you to describe them, if you can, just each one for a half a minute or a minute. And then if you can, rank them in terms of your own, I mean, it can be anecdotal, but and you could even use your own life, but talk about the basic building blocks that you have identified. And a lot of it will sound like common sense to people, but it's not, to a lot of people, it's not abundantly clear what you're about to articulate.
Yeah, I mean, happiness is something that we all think we know until we start thinking about it, then it becomes hard to define. So on the first day of class, I ask my students, well, what is happiness? And I go around the room and they all talk about the feeling that you get when they talk about their emotions, they talk about their sensations. And that's like saying that Thanksgiving dinner is the smell of the turkey. It doesn't actually make sense. The smell of the turkey is a result of the turkey dinner. It's a symptom of the turkey dinner. It's evidence of the turkey dinner, but it's not the turkey dinner. And the same thing is true about happy feelings. You get happy feelings as a result of actual happiness, which is a combination of basically three things. Now, you could describe them as macronutrients. Food is all made up of protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Those are the three macronutrients of food. And similarly, happiness has three basic building blocks, three basic elements that you need in balance and abundance to feel like a happy person. The first is enjoyment. The second is satisfaction. And the third is purpose. The enjoyment is not pleasure. It has pleasure in it, but pleasure is a limbic phenomenon. It's an ancient brain phenomenon. Pleasure happens to you in response to an outside stimulus. Enjoyment is something that involves your elevation. It involves your consciousness to take pleasure and turn it into something that endures and that can be elevated, that you can understand. And in so doing, it becomes really part of happiness. Satisfaction is the reward for a job well done. So when you say, is it satisfying to have a book on the bestseller list? It's a reward. It's simply a worldly reward for a job well done. The problem, the science of satisfaction is so interesting. I've written about it for you a bunch of times, but in a long feature a couple of weeks ago, as a matter of fact, was the fact that
that's in the chat, by the way, if you want to open it up for everybody.
Yeah, yeah, that's
How to Want Less is the headline.
How to Want Less, and it's the cover piece for the March issue of the world's greatest magazine, aka The Atlantic. And it's a satisfaction. Mick Jagger, the third most popular rock and roll song of all time, according to Rolling Stone magazine, is "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." It's been popular since I was 1, and I'm not very young. So it just shows you the enduring, the endurance of this particular message. It's actually not quite right. The truth is you can get satisfaction, but you can't keep no satisfaction. It comes, it goes, it's very fleeting. And there's all kinds of neuroscience that explains why this is. We can't stay in one particular emotional state. It's called homeostasis. We go back to equilibrium physically and emotionally such that we're ready for the next set of circumstances. And that means you try to get the goal and your brain says, if you get it, you'll keep it forever, but you don't because you can't. You must not for survival. And that's the paradox of satisfaction. The last is purpose. That's the last macronutrient. And that's actually the most mysterious of all. The reason is because purpose and meaning require suffering and pain. We tend to be psychological hedonists. We want to go from good feeling to good feeling to good feeling. And lately, in particular, there's a lot of evidence that suggests that people are trying to avoid bad feelings more than ever. On college campuses, you see a tremendous number of people seeking mental health treatment, and in many cases, absolutely justified and it's important. But in a lot of cases, it's because they're getting the message that feeling bad is always bad. The problem with that way of thinking is that, anybody who's watching us now, and you think about when did you really get your sense of life purpose, at least in some cases of your experiences, you'll talk about bad things, losses, fright, bereavement, for example. And this is really important to keep in mind, because if you're going to go through life trying to avoid unhappiness, paradoxically, you'll avoid meaning. And in so doing, you'll avoid your happiness. You'll avoid this macronutrient of happiness. These are the building blocks. And ultimately, this is what I study. I study enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose.
Right. Go take that one more turn, which is where I was trying to head, to the factors that must be in order in your life, the 4 factors: family, work, and you can relabel these if you want, if my labels aren't accurate: family, work, faith, and friends. And we've talked about this obviously in the past. We worked together.
Mhm.
And you have suggested that the older a person gets, the more meaningful, stable set of friendships, meaningful friendships count for a huge amount. But go break
Yeah.
that formula down a little bit.
So what you're talking about relates to the habits of the happiness. So
The
this is not the
habits of
definition of happiness, but the habits of happy people. So this is based on approximately 10,000 academic journal articles that says, what do happy people do? What do happy people do? What do they have in common? Now, what they don't have in common is their baseline happiness level. Half of your happiness is genetic, based on identical twin studies. And then another quarter of your happiness is circumstantial. And that's just moving all over the place. And it's going to wear off. People always think if I get this certain set of circumstances, I'm going to be happy forever. No, you're not. Once again, it's homeostasis. We talked about that a minute ago. But the last quarter is really stable and really predictable and has to do with your habits. This is the part of your happiness that's really under your control. And you can break them down, the 4 habits into, or the 4 accounts. This is kind of, these are your investment accounts. You have to put your energy into every day. And they fall into faith, family, friendship, and meaningful work, where work really has only 2 characteristics, which is earning your success, a sense that your skills and your passions meet, and that you serve other people who really, really need you. So on these 4 accounts, the first, faith, it sounds dogmatic or it sounds conventional, but it really isn't. By that, I just mean a sense of the transcendent. You can be an atheist and you can still have this. It's something that's bigger than you. The Dalai Lama always says, remember you're 1 in 7 billion. And the reason is because you need peace and you need relief from your Jeff Goldberginess. I mean, it's like,
by the way, just to note, it's easy for him to say he's the Dalai Lama.
and the whole point is that life is tiresome because we're obsessed with something that's quite monotonous, aka our daily life. Right. And something that lets us zoom out to the transcendental is unbelievably happiness provoking, whether it's a deep dive into the lives of the Stoic philosophers, or it's the Roman Catholic Church, or a meditation practice, or whatever it happens to be. That is a really, really important part of a good life.
Could I just intervene here and ask you the flip side, the negative flip side of this is, are people who subscribe to QAnon conspiracy theory, are they happy because they found a mission and a faith larger than themselves?
It's not really the case that, well, it's, for one thing, we haven't actually done happiness studies on QAnon.
Well,
however,
how about
quasi-religions,
political extremist movement?
Yeah.
I mean,
and
talk about that.
The answer to that basically is sadly yes. That religion, that David Foster Wallace, writer, philosopher, said famously that everybody worships something, that people are made to worship. Now, a lot of people, the most unhappy people, they don't worship something transcendental. They worship themselves. In the era of social media, that's the meism. That's the most metastatically dangerous cult of all, which is the worship of yourself. And that's incredibly unsatisfying because you're worshiping this thing that you're obsessed with and that is boring, and it can really become like a self-licking ice cream cone. And it's a terrible metaphor, but you get my point. But people who try to have a sense of things bigger than themselves, a wisdom bigger than themselves, and a cause to which they can dedicate themselves, even if it's a negative one, that will actually tend to raise subjective well-being. Now, if it's a good cause, if it's something that really does serve other people, and especially if the vehicular language of worship is love, then it gets to be real magic. Then it actually is this concept of transcendental love. This is the reason that, it's a really interesting thing in the Christian Bible, where a Pharisee comes to Jesus and he says, the 10 Commandments, it's a lot to remember. Boil it down for me, Lord. And he says, okay, think of just 2 things. Love the Lord your God with all your soul and all your might and all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, which, by the way, is the same thing, because if God is omnipotent, doesn't need love, the way that you love is actually by loving somebody who's created in God's image, aka your neighbor. And so love your neighbor as yourself. And then 300 years later, St. Augustine is asked, even that's too much to remember. How do I boil it down even further? And St. Augustine says, love and do what you will. It really comes down to this sense of the transcendent as manifest in this cosmic love. Then you can get the pure source of this meaning and happiness that you're really looking for. Everything else is kind of counterfeit. everything else doesn't work quite as well and actually lead to all kinds of secondary problems is what we find, which is one of the reasons that all of the world's wholesome religions, they have a tendency to focus a whole lot on transcendent love, actually. So this is important. And then, of course, this is related to family and meaningful work that serves others and friendship. In other words, the secrets are love, 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 and more love.
Love is the answer. And you say you're
this
not
is a song. We're actually writing a song.
No, you say you're not a rock star. Why? I'm curious about I mean, moving broader into social science and into your older work at the American Enterprise Institute and things that you thought about our society. Our society, or large swaths of it, are becoming rapidly secularized.
Right.
Western Europe, going sort of in the direction of Western Europe. Social media, and let's stipulate that one thing that religion does, certainly, is say, you know what, you think you're all that, but there's something greater than you, right? Social media, as you say, is the Black Mirror is Narcissus's mirror.
Right.
It's social media is about the worship of self. Talk about those trends, because it seems as if you've got at least a couple of things where, and also, by the way, throw in political polarization and this kind of assumption on the part of different tribes in America that the other tribe is actually not only just bad, they've not just made bad choices or have bad ideas, but are actually evil. It just seems that there's a lot in American life right now that's working against happiness, as you describe happiness.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's
how do individuals combat this broad sweep of negative trends?
Yeah. So the happiness, there's an 84-year longitudinal study here called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. It's followed hundreds of people over 8 decades, and it looks at what they did earlier in life and what their values were and how they were brought up and everything. And it wants to be kind of a crystal ball. What are the predictors of happiness late in life? And the answer is, the guy who ran it for 30 years, a guy named George Valiant, a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School, he said, happiness is love, full stop. It really is the nuclear fuel, just what we're talking about before. Okay, so let's get back to your question. What's the problem today? Well, the opposite of love is fear. People often think the opposite of love is hatred. It's not. As a cognitive matter, in the limbic system of the brain, the greatest amount of tissue is occupied by the amygdala and the parts of the brain that process fear. Fear is the ultimate negative emotion. And by the way, it's kept us alive. Thank goodness for fear. Otherwise we'd be a saber-toothed tiger's lunch 500,000 years ago and goodbye to our family line. So fear is a good thing when it's appropriate. The opposite, the most prominent positive emotion is love. And so these are cognitive, these are psychological opposites. They're philosophical opposites. They are theological opposites, according to the Tao Te Ching and the Gospel of St. John. These are opposites. Now, the reason I bring this up is because you find in any political system or any community or any nation at any particular time, you're going to be in one polarity or another. You're going to be in a love polarity or you're going to be in a fear polarity. That doesn't mean that if it's in a love polarity, it's all love all the time. You can get all kinds of actions and emotions, etc. But a basic polarity is going to be love or fear. And we see this in families constantly. What drives families apart, what drives people, what drives people to divorce court is that they get into a fear polarity and they need to get back into a love polarity because they're opposites from each other. And we've been in an extended fear polarity in American politics. Many countries around the world have as well. So what's the answer to that? And the answer to that is that all of us need to bring more love. If you bring fear into a fear polarity, you're simply strengthening this. You're strengthening this problem. I don't care how much you think the other side is terrible and evil and awful and nefarious and diabolical. I mean, it just goes on and on. You're not going to make things better under any circumstances. You need to neutralize the fear in our society with more love, notwithstanding your feelings. Now you can say, I don't feel it. It doesn't matter. Martin Luther King always talked about this. He said that To like is a sentimental something. To love is an act of courage, and it's a decision. He talked about, Matthew 5:44, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. It's a decision. St. Thomas Aquinas called it to will the good of the other, not to feel anything under the circumstances. And so each one of us has the answer. Each one of us actually has the ability to bring more happiness by bringing more love, and in so doing to repair some corner of our culture, some corner of our nation, by showing love when other people are exhibiting fear, usually as manifest in hatred.
This is we'll come back to some practical things in a second, but this is a kind of, sorry for the sirens outside.
Are they coming for you?
There's a theological question. Are you saying that fear is the producer of hate rather than evil? Is there such a thing as evil in your understanding of the world? That people who are committing acts of evil are actually just acting out of fear and not a willful understanding of I am doing a bad thing because it pleasures me?
I think that's right. Fear is the opposite. Hatred is downstream from fear. Evil is the absence of good. Evil isn't a thing. Evil isn't a positive phenomenon. It's a lack of a phenomenon. It's when love and goodness and love are not present, are completely absent, when they're in a void of that. That's when we would actually perceive evil. And the way that we would perceive evil is in love's opposite, which cognitive and psychological, philosophical opposite, which is fear. And usually that's expressed in hatred.
I'm going to ask a facetious sounding but non-facetious question. Vladimir Putin ever been happy?
It's a good question. I strongly suspect that he's a deeply, deeply miserable individual. I think that he's probably extremely limbic. And by that, I mean, it's funny, when you say to your kids and your kids are little, use your words, because they're freaking out. The reason is because what you're asking them to do is to become metacognitive, to move their feelings and urges from their limbic system into their prefrontal cortex where they can manage them. That's what you're saying when you say use your words. When you meet another adult who's highly reactive, when they act according to their urges, when they're like a bundle of urges, sensations, of emotions, acting out of bravado and emotion, they bring a lot of misery to other people. You would say that they're very, very limbic, and there are a lot of people like that. I mean, I don't know. I can't psychologize about this too very much.
You don't have them on the couch, and you're not a shrink anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's an interesting question, and I mean, I think what you're saying is, obviously, this is on a smaller scale than Putin, is like when you're having a highly reactive feeling about something, it is worth asking yourself, why am I reacting this way?
Yeah.
And that's what you're saying, is move the thought.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, I mean, I'm very interested in Vladimir Putin's happiness and unhappiness, but I'm even more interested in yours. Are you happy?
So that's a good question. That's a fair question, actually. And, I ask my students to take 16 happiness questionnaires over the course of the semester in all different facets, from, positive and negative emotions to their expression of their values, to the centrality of worldly success, to their sense of who they are, et cetera, et cetera. And I generally score in the middle to low range in happiness, as it turns out. But everything is in progress.
By the way, I'm sorry, just to open this up for a minute. Can you give us 3 or 4 examples of the questions that people are answering on these quizzes?
Yeah. So, for example, the first, I'll have them answer general happiness inventories, where compared to other people, I consider myself to be a happy person. I generally see the brighter sides of life, et cetera. So those types of questions, you ask enough of those questions to soften people up till they're starting to answer more or less honestly. And you can get a pretty good, these are psychometrically the validated questionnaires, generally speaking, and there's a lot of them, and I make them, and then we go into things like their positive and negative affect levels, and this is a really interesting kind of thing to ask people about, because positive affect means good feelings, negative affect means bad feelings. They're not opposites, and you can be high or low in both. So it's a pretty interesting thing. And so you can be high positive, high negative affect. You're just a high affect person. You can be low. You're a low affect person, low positive feelings, low negative feelings. You can be high in negative, low in positive. You can be high in positive, low in negative. And we have these profiles. So if you're a really high positive, low negative person, that's a cheerleader profile. And everybody wants to be one, but they tend to be pretty bad leaders because they make bad decisions and they can't actually see risk. You can be somebody who's real high in both, high negative, high positive. That's the mad scientist. A lot of entrepreneurs are mad scientists. I'm a classic mad scientist. So what drives down my affect balance on these general happiness questionnaires is not the fact that I have low happiness. I have really high happiness. I also have really high unhappiness. That's the problem. And actually, and they fight with each other in the mad scientist. The high negative and low positive, that's the poet, right? And poets turn out to be incredibly valuable because they're really creative and they tend to see risk and problems before other people. We need them around us. You need them around you, Jeff, as you're running the magazine, is the bottom line. And then, of course, you've got the low, and these are the judges. These are the people you want to be your surgeon. This is the person you want to be your secret service agent, right? A guy actually in one of my classes says, I'm a judge, I'm low. I mean, will I ever, is there, what kind of job could I have where I could be successful? And I said, well, what job did you come from? And he said, I was an Israeli secret service agent. And I said, perfect. I don't want a mad scientist or a cheerleader in that job.
Right.
So this is the kind of thing that I'm asking him. And what it turns out is that, I'm pretty normal, but the reason that I care about happiness is because I need more of it. It's me search. And I know everybody who does the science of happiness. And, there's nobody who's just a Boolean. There's no cheerleaders doing research in this field. You got people who are looking for more and they want to find answers for themselves and for others. And that's what I'm doing. Look, when I stepped down as CEO of his think tank a few years ago, and I said, what am I going to do? And I discerned it. I prayed about it for a long time, as a matter of fact. And I decided I was going to dedicate the rest of my life to happiness, to lifting people up and bringing them together, and writing for you, for the Atlantic, teaching that class at Harvard, and writing this book. That's part of the strategic plan. And the best news of all is I'm getting happier.
Do people not you believe that you're happier? I'm thinking of your wife, your children.
Yeah. My wife has actually noticed that. I mean, I'm not a gloomy person. I'm not, unbearable to be around, but we've been married for 30 years. And she says, I mean, she notices the difference that it makes me happy to be able to bring happiness to other people, because once again, understand, apply, and teach.
Let's talk about happiness as a person ages.
Right.
Two questions or two subjects. One is how your intelligence and your creativity change.
Yeah.
And I think you have made the strong case in different articles in the book that there's nothing you could do about the changes that happen in your brain as you age, vis-a-vis your creativity and intelligence. The second half of the question, or the commentary that I'm looking for, is how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
How do you enter your 60s and 70s saying, okay, this is what it is. I'm going to take advantage of what other people might think of as disadvantages.
Yeah. So it's a deep question. And it actually, the way to answer that is to go back to what psychologists were finding in the mid part of the 20th century. There was this theory that there's two kinds of geniuses. There's the geniuses that appear early in life, and they're super innovative, super high cognitive horsepower, the chess geniuses, the early entrepreneurs, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world. And then you've got the late bloomers, and these are the ones who are just preternaturally wise. These are the Dalai Lamas that come into the world and they can actually teach better. They can show us the things that we need to know. So there's the inventors and there's the instructor geniuses. And for the longest time, you thought there was the two types of geniuses. Well, as the science progressed, people started figuring out that we're all both, that we all have some sort of a genius within us, but early on, our ability tends to be toward the innovator, and later on, it's toward the instructor. Now, the real problem for strivers in the world, the hard workers, my students, a lot of people watching us that through their 20s and early 30s, they're busting their picks, they're working super hard, and they're getting all kinds of rewards for it because they have this is called fluid intelligence, this innovator curve. it tends to peak about age 36 to age 42, something in there, and then it starts to come back down again. And just the structure of the brain
This is why McCartney and Lennon wrote their best songs in their
exactly right. Exactly right. And that's the reason that there are very, very few software entrepreneurs who are 60. I mean, it just doesn't happen that way. Just the brain doesn't work that way. Now, the problem is that the strivers who work so hard for it, you don't hear about this. It's 10,000 hours and you get better and better. And they chain themselves to this fluid intelligence curve and they're writing it downward and they're depressed or they're disappointed or they're freaked out about the fact that they're not as good as they used to be. Now, what they don't know and what they don't tell us is that the crystallized intelligence curve, the Dalai Lama curve, is lurking right behind it and is increasing when the first one is decreasing through your 40s and 50s, and which stays high in your 60s and 70s and 80s, even in your 90s, if you get your marbles that long, that what it is your wisdom curve is increasing, your ability to teach, your ability to synthesize information that's out there. You can learn languages better. You can't dominate the accent very well, but you can learn vocabulary better. You're a better Scrabble player. You understand history better. You become a teacher in almost every field better. These are crystallized intelligence kind of things. This is the reason, by the way, that that historians tend to have done half their work at age 65, and the better half is after 65, because it's a pure crystallized intelligence field. Whereas entrepreneurs and people who do entrepreneurial things, they usually have half their work done by about 35 or 40, and the better half is in the first half, is what we find. So here's the deal. Here's the trick. You're going to be a real striver. You're going to ride that fluid intelligence curve. And sometime between about the age of 40 and 50, you need to jump from one curve to the other. That's what the book is about. It's about how to understand what the curve is, to have the courage to recognize that the second curve exists, and how to surf it from one to the other. And every single one of us can actually do that if we have the confidence to do it and the faith that that the curve exists.
Why don't people do it?
Number one, people don't like to change. People in their 40s and 50s, they're just like, what do you want me to do? Get a new job? I mean, I got a mortgage to pay. I got mouths to feed, or I just don't want to. I mean, it sounds stressful, or I don't actually believe that. I don't have the confidence, because jumping from one thing to another, and by the way, maybe that's a new job, maybe that's a new career, maybe that's just a new emphasis in your work. Going from the hotshot lawyer who cracks the case, the cowboy, to trying to be the managing partner where you're coaching and managing a bunch of lawyers. That's fluid to crystallized, and there's a version of that in every career. And so maybe you're lazy, maybe you don't trust, maybe you don't believe it, maybe you're afraid, maybe you're a success addict, and so you're kind of chained to that first curve. There's a bunch of different reasons people don't do it.
That's interesting. I think a question that different people in the audience have has to do with making friends. I mean, I think people take to heart what you say about the importance of friendships, meaningful friendships, confidential friendships, especially as you get older. But a question that we're hearing from this audience and other audiences is, why does it seem to get so hard to make friends in your 50s and your 60s? Is it just that people are so tired? I mean, or does it go to this, man, I got a mortgage to pay. I don't have time to and I can't stay out all night drinking the way I did when I was in my 20s or however. What's the practical advice you can give to people in terms of friendship as they hit their 50s and 60s?
Yeah, this new book has a whole chapter on that. And friendship is a skill that requires practice, and we get out of practice. Now, weirdly, the loneliest people in society traditionally have been 60-year-old men. And the reason for that is because they have kind of gotten out of the practice of having friends. Now, there's two kinds of friends, basically. There's deal friends and there's real friends. And we all know the difference. Your deal friends are the people you work with, the people who can give you stuff, the people who are helpful to you. They're instrumental to you. There's nothing wrong with that. But those aren't real friends. You wouldn't call them at 2 a.m. weeping. I'm hoping you don't have to do that anyway, but you get my point that real friends are different. And what happens is a lot of people, when they get into their 40s and 50s and 60s, they have a ton of deal friends. They don't have many real friends. Leaders and strivers in particular tend to be very lonely people. And again, nobody feels sorry for strivers, especially people who make a lot of money or who have a lot of prominence, but can be extremely lonely and miserable. because it's all deal, no real, basically. And so one of the things that I talk about in the book is actually spending the time and making the effort actually to create some real friendships. And it's not rocket science. It just actually requires putting in the time and telling people what you want. Hanging out with a few people, telling somebody that maybe you're not a very emotive person, but you have to tell people that, hey, I like hanging out with you. Let's go hang out. And I got nothing on my mind. And furthermore, I mean, my wife and I have kind of figured out how to do this because we've experimented and looked at the research and experimented with a bunch of different techniques, and we've moved a lot. So when we move, for example, when we moved to Boston, we didn't want to be lonely, but we didn't have any friends up here. So what do? We act like we've been here for 10 years the day we get here, which means that as soon as we get here, within 2 weeks, we're having people over to dinner to our house, which you never do when you first move to a place, right? And inevitably, there are people who've lived 20 or 30 years in the place, and they'll be like, yeah, we never go to anybody's house for dinner. This is awesome. How long have you lived here? It's like 10 days, right? And then we go deeper.
Where did you find them? When you go to the supermarket and patrol the aisles, what do you do?
Well, we go to church. I mean, we're Catholics. And so there's always people, and you talk to a couple of people afterward, and then you say, hey, why don't we get together for dinner? Like, yeah,
so sure. The faith has a practical aspect.
For sure. It has a huge community impact to it. But people who aren't practicing faith, who don't have any faith, there's all kinds of community things that people can do. And once again, that's a predicate to it, to actually acting, again, not work, outside work. People who don't appreciate you for being the king of the mambo, think that you're some sort of big shot. People who don't care and don't know that you're the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic. They would say, Atlantic, what's that? Is that a travel magazine? What is it? And you don't care. You're
describing my children, actually, the people who don't care the most. Wait, I actually want to ask you another question. This has come up in conversation around this event. And I have 3 children. You have 3. You have 3.
Yep.
One of the things that you look forward to, I think it's a little premature for me, probably premature for you to say this, but you look forward to grandchildren. But I think a lot of people who don't have children, who are in their 50s and their 60s, who don't have children, sometimes wonder, are they heading for more loneliness because they don't have offspring, and those offspring therefore don't have the offspring that don't exist have offspring? Is there something that works against the loneliness that might come with that, or am I just misinterpreting the challenge here entirely?
There's a lot of research on this, actually. It's pretty interesting. And the first piece of research asks, will you be really happy because of the relationship you have with your adult kids? And the answer is no. It's not bad, but you're not going to have the relationship that you expect with your adult kids. And there's a bunch of different reasons for it. Some people are super close. The more physically proximate you are to your adult kids, the more of a deep relationship, a mature relationship you'll have with them. But in the modern world, where you live 2,000 miles away from them, you're just not going to develop that kind of warmth. It just doesn't, you wish you would, but the data are really, really clear. The greatest warmth happens even with a rebellious, angry teenager before the person moves out. And once they move out, it becomes attenuated. It just naturally becomes attenuated. So that's the one thing. It tends to be a real disappointment for a lot of people. And so you have to put in the effort. The second thing that we find is that the closest relationships that people have later in life are the relationships that they have are actually with friends, with unrelated individuals. These are the most intimate relationships where people talk about their feelings, for example. Now, women tend to be better at this than men. You find that women bond around feelings, men bond around activities. So it's like, let's build a birdhouse together or something, Jeff. That's how, our friendship will be based on baseball, for example. And that's a classic. It's like my dad and I, we talked about sports. The Chicago Cubs, because my dad was a huge Cubs fan. I never, but that was just how men typically do this. And the bottom line is that you can develop these deep friendships later in life, but you actually have to put in the effort to do that. And in so doing, you can be every bit as fulfilled and happy as somebody who had kids, sometimes much more so.
Can a person, I want to switch subjects a little bit, and this is something else that's come up. How does a person learn to stop comparing him or herself to people who have greater achievements or more visible achievements? That seems to be sort of a prerequisite here for a lot.
Yeah. Social comparison.
Envy is Not a feeling anybody wants to have, but everybody has it to some degree.
Yeah, envy is Joseph Epstein here in Chicago, there in Chicago, where this event is being hosted. One time said that envy is the only deadly sin that's not even fun. and the truth is that social comparison, Theodore Roosevelt called it the thief of joy. And it's absolutely the case that you cannot actually enjoy your life if you're walking around comparing yourself always with others. So there's a couple of things to think about. Number one is that people who have suffered a lot of trauma and experienced post-traumatic growth, which is the vast majority of trauma sufferers. 90% of people who suffered significant trauma wind up saying net that they've grown from the experience as a result of that. And one of the ways that they've grown is that they care less what other people think. It's a superpower. Right. So that's one of the things that's worth keeping in mind. Why is it that a traumatic thing would do that? Is because life is short. I can't believe I was worrying about somebody, thinking there goes that bald guy. I mean, what do I care? I mean, I survived cancer, you might say, if that's actually your circumstances. And I know a bunch of people who talk about it that way. The fast way to do this without actually having a terrible, set of circumstances befall you, if you don't want to be a victim of social comparison, stop judging others. Just stop. And this is a very Buddhist idea, and the Dalai Lama talks about this a lot, but this is an ancient Buddhist idea, but it's also a religious idea. Judge not, lest ye be judged. When you're judging other people, you're saying that it's legitimate for us to judge each other, and you're opening yourself up to constant social comparison. So go through, here's the exercise that I ask my students to do. Go through a day. No, go through an hour without judging anything. Nothing, just observe. And it's just weirdly liberating. It's hard, but it's weirdly liberating. It's like, it's raining. I hate rain. No. It's raining. That's it. That somebody cuts you off in traffic. Obviously that person's in a hurry. Don't judge not. And the less you judge, the less you will feel judged, which is the social comparison problem, which is so terrible for happiness.
Can I ask you a question? Have you stopped judging people? Did you ever judge?
We're all pretty.
We both came up in Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
which is pretty judgy place. It's zero-sum judgment,
Yeah. I'm better at it than I used to be because I've made it metacognitive. This is a task that I put myself to. One of the great things about being a social scientist is that you have to eat your own cooking. Or you don't have to, but it's a good idea if you eat your own cooking. I mean, this book that I've written about basically the happiness 401k, the 7 habits of people who really do get happier as they get older, is that I start engaging in these things and I actually see results. Actually, I didn't even intend to publish this as a book. It was just a project for me because I wanted to be happier as I got older. And my wife said, you might want to share this with some other people. So I sent it to my agent. And so it's a pretty interesting thing. I find that I judge a lot less now than I used to because there's zero upside for me. There's no satisfaction that comes from that. And all I do is I wind up in an invidious comparison of other people in which I don't win because I'm inferior under that judgment, even in my own eyes.
Right. Hi, Lonnie.
Hi, Lonnie.
Hi, how are you?
Still here. That's great. That's a good sign.
Yeah, here. Did you have another question, Jeff? Did you want to close
out?
No.
Jump in if you have questions from.
Yeah, there's definitely some questions here. I want to ask one question. I'm actually going to do a dealer's choice here. I don't normally do that, but Arthur, I'm curious. When you made your own career transition from as you were kind of coming that confrontation between the fluid intelligence and the crystallized intelligence piece, when you kind of saw that it was time to make that jump that you talk about, could you talk a little bit about the clinging, the mental and emotional, not necessarily yours, but a person's, let's put it that way. Can you talk a little bit about the clinging that people can have that can make it so difficult to relinquish everything that comes with achievement, especially for a striver?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I did have a lot of fear. I mean, I had written large parts of this and I was doing research on this and I wrote for The Atlantic in 2019, the original essay that went into this book. That Jeff commissioned it, as a matter of fact. And I had been thinking about it for about a year and I decided I was going to step down from my job as a result of this. But I remember sitting on an airplane I was coming back from the Middle East, having done a bunch of speeches in India, and I had a layover in Dubai, and I was coming back from Dubai, and I just remember it because I was sitting on the airplane thinking, I'm making the biggest mistake of my life. I'm everything I worked for, all the things I worked for. But then I thought about it. It's like, really? Everything you worked for is money? Everything you worked for is power? Really? I mean, that's hardly a victory. How good is that? Are you happy? And the answer is no, I wasn't happy. I was lonely. I was spending my 14th hour of work instead of my first hour with my kids. I was making a whole bunch of mistakes. I was deeply addicted to the worldly success that I had. And it was making me miserable. And I had to recognize that. And I'd done the research into why I was miserable about it. And I reassessed it. I remember on that plane ride saying, what am I I'm turning in a bunch of money for happiness. I'm literally buying my happiness by doing this. And by the time I got off the plane, I felt I wasn't at peace exactly, but I was ready to actually, but again, what's the point here? The point here is I took it out of the realm of feelings, managing me, and I made it into a situation in which I could manage the feelings by having this consciousness of these patterns.
Thanks. I appreciate you teasing that out because I think that can be really hard. The attachment to the status is really tough to relinquish, I think, for a lot of folks who have experienced a lot of achievement. I want to remind folks that you can buy a copy of it. I'm so sorry that I completely spaced on the title of your book. I feel like such a fool.
No, it's okay.
Maybe it's because I don't have an actual physical copy, because from strength to strength, you can order it through the bookstall. It may be, you may have to wait a minute for it to arrive, but we've been putting in links for folks, and there's another link right there to buy the book. And I want to also just, first of all, thank both of you for a great conversation. People are very happy with us. I want to say, so Anna is asking, since every culture manifests values and aspirations differently, do we need a fixed recipe for happiness?
That's it. Well, it's a good question. And in fact, different cultures do define happiness in different ways. And I've written about this a great deal. One of the biggest, the worst happiness studies out there is the UN comparison of countries. It's like, what's the happy? I mean, it's completely meaningless, and we should reject it out of hand. And different people, in fact, but there are certain underlying truths. The idea of faith, family, friendship, and meaningful work is a truth. I mean, this is an empirical regularity. And one of the beautiful things about happiness is that we're all sisters and brothers. We all have certain things that we need in a world that's being torn apart by differences. The search for happiness and love is something that we all have in common. And the way that we can bring happiness and love to other people and thus tie ourselves together is indeed the secret to our own happiness ourselves. And that's something that really is not, doesn't change across cultures. That doesn't change across individuals. That's a worldwide, I think, pretty transcendental truth.
Okay, very good. We're at 7:58, 7:59 now. Local State of the Union address starts in 1 minute. We are going to close out here to make sure that people can pivot and get ready to take in, which
Look
I'm
at
sure
another
is gonna be
screen.
look at another screen for another who knows how long. I want to thank you very much, Professor Brooks, for joining FAN. We do really appreciate it. And Mr. Goldberg, it's been a pleasure getting to know you as well. And we're thrilled to be hosting many of your writers. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone
Lonnie,
for joining.
Thanks, Jeff.
And we'll see everyone soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good evening.